I'll start a bit about us. Bonard is a research and advisory firm focused on student housing and rental residential sectors. We provide data across 20 countries, 130 submarkets, and 5,600 buildings that we monitor. And our data is independent, unbiased, and certified, working with numerous groups around the globe. So I'm trying, Richard, to enlarge the screen because I only see this the presentation in broadcast, and
I'm not sure if it's practical to do that, Samuel.
Okay, so I'll be looking at my notes. Good. So student housing, just sort of latest context. Overall, of course, when the mobility stops during the pandemic, then we have difficulties in our sector, but in and after recession that will come after pandemic, this asset class is expected to have more students, as we will see later on the overall numbers. In the previous semester, the occupancies were decreased. In Germany from 97.8% to 91 to 93%, so it was some kind of an impact, but not fatal. In other territories, probably went down to around 80%. In some territories, it was fatal and it went down to zero. But the sector was not as impacted as the other asset classes like hotels or office. For the fall semester 2020, on the Northern Hemisphere, we are pretty much at par with expectations. So most of the countries have opened borders to students. The international students are arriving at the level, or new arrivals are at the level of around 50%. Many students stayed from the previous semester, so renewals are very strong for student housing. And let's say flight distances, destinations like UK might not have as many international students arriving as probably Central Europe like Germany or Poland, where the dependence on intra-regional international student mobility is greater. On the other hand, some other destinations like Canada or Australia that were high hopes for student housing at the beginning, so prior summer, actually did not open the borders to international students, so they have not such great numbers as they were hoped for the beginning. Therefore, the entire sector is more dependent on domestic students, which seem to be in some territories like UK arriving in greater numbers for various reasons that we can elaborate later on. From operational point of view, where we moved from June, July to today, is that not only that most of the premises have adjusted to the COVID measures, but they also adjusted to COVID cases. So there are contingency plans. Most of the operators and stakeholders that we work with handle this with routine. And as we see students arriving now for fall semester, then they handle it very well. When it comes to capital markets, the transactions, we have statistics for the first part of the year. So last year we had 85 transactions in student housing altogether in entire 2019 year. This year so far we have 25 transactions, which is 42% less than the year before for the same period. So there is a decrease, but not probably as impactful as in other asset classes. The pipeline projects to be open in 2020 Most of them are on schedule. We have seen about, out of the 175 projects to be open in 2020, we already seen about 30 to 40 to be late or distressed. The alternative financing is coming to the market. There is a strong financial support. I'll talk about it later. Most important message is that investors remain confident. So we have not noticed no divestments as the fundamentals remain strong and the defensive nature of this asset class is confirmed. On the other hand, we see new opportunistic investors, especially American capital, coming to Europe and invest in student housing. So I'm trying to move the slide, but okay. So what has changed significantly is that when in spring, we were talking about 4 possible scenarios, which is the V shape, L shape, U shape, and W shape. With the V shape and L shape being very unlikely. So we were contemplating about the U shape and W shape as possible scenarios of recovery. Now it's pretty clear that we are experiencing the W shape. So there is a sort of a second wave of restrictions. I wouldn't call it second wave of COVID, but restrictions. So mobility is not as renewed as we probably hoped for. So most of the programs run hybrid or online, and therefore probably the recovery of the occupancies and the recovery of the standard mobility will probably be postponed for Q1, Q2 2021, as you see over here on the graph. So how have the student housing operators adjusted to COVID measures? I will not read all of this. The presentation will be available afterwards for a download. But this asset class has probably adapted the most to COVID, and basically student housing is seen as, or student housing premises are seen as lighthouses of very disciplined and structured approach to COVID, and a better solution for students or young people to when compares to other possible HMO or homestays or flats. So it's safer and therefore more desired. But there is a very sophisticated system of face covering, social distancing, limit for groupings, special stuff for COVID measures, contactless payments, then adjusted COVID booking guarantees marketing, then sort of reliefs, 14 days early for free arrivals, etc. So in these regards, basically the asset class adapted within weeks to something that is preventing the spread and establishing the contingency plans. As I mentioned, most of the players have already experienced the COVID case and were able to get over it. So what are the overall trends? As I mentioned, most of the investors, operators, lenders, banks, developers believe in the long-term fundamentals and defensive nature of this asset class. However, this coming academic year, the sector will be more dependent on domestic students as the international mobility is not fully renewed. And there is an unstoppable globalization trend. There is more mobility, more urbanization, more flexibility, less owning, more renting, and usually enhanced by recessions. So there is a general likelihood that 2021 will be actually relatively good, if not a better year for the asset class. And that already factors into more capital being available now for the asset class, more demand from the capital in States and Asia that is a feeder for further development and opportunistic investors. Just some supportive numbers. So this is last 25 years, international student numbers, selected destinations, and how they performed over the economic recessions or economic downturns. So you can see that across each and any of those, the student numbers went up. So it confirmed the defensive asset class nature. And that when it comes to the economic recession that we can expect, that might be sort of an enhancer of the student numbers. Case study, Germany. So this features not only the international students, but also local domestic students. And this is last 70 years. So a longer timeline with more economic downturns. And you can see how the domestic student numbers and international student numbers performed across these times. And you see only direction of the trajectory. So where are we now? You can, we prepared the 9 countries breakdown, where you can see whether the students are allowed to return, international students, in the line number 1. Then you can see the dependency on international students. So the greater the number, the more difficult situation this year. Follow with the percentage of international students that don't need visa. So they are not dependent whether the visa offices are open or not, or they can process the study permit or not. Then what's the percentage of flights that operate at the moment, mode of learning, so whether the delivery is online, hybrid, or on-site, and whether the students are allowed to return not only to the country, but to the PBSAs. In general, all the 9 countries over here, so UK, Spain, Italy, later on you will see Netherlands, France, Germany, Austria, Poland, and I will see the 9th country, apologies. And all the countries allow students to come to PBSAs. The differences are dependency on international students and those who need a visa. In general, the situation is still relatively okay. In most of the countries, even though they flag red countries, source countries, some of them, students are exempt. So they can arrive, which is a good news. It's not so in Australia or Canada, but most of the European countries are in this position. When it comes to the delivery, most, if not all, the destinations have a hybrid delivery. So there are very few cases, and it's rather university by university that the delivery is online only. Okay, so we can see Netherlands, France, and Germany over here, which gives you an idea that Netherlands is restricting some of the students to come. So only students with long stay visa and students with residence notification letter are allowed. So, but other than that, the country is pretty much within the standards that I mentioned. And we have Ireland, Austria, and Poland. So you can see that the situation over here is pretty similar. Austria has some restrictions, but students with D visa and students with residence permits are allowed. In general, what I can say is that recently we are doing research on occupancy levels across the countries, because many of the universities have not even started yet. So sometimes in mid-October, we would like to share more on what are the occupancy levels for new semester. But the situation is that most of the students can come, I mean international students, and most of the domestic students are coming. So far, from anecdotal research, I can share that the occupancy levels of student housing premises are mostly about 80%, from what we know, but we don't have a representative sample yet. Yes, there are more domestic students than last year in the student housing premises. And price-wise, we don't see many discounts. So the operators basically are able to fill these premises at competitive rental levels. So some kind of a market temperature. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, no divestments, but more opportunistic investors. We've seen 11 new investments in PBSA, 25 transactions, which is only 42% less. Booking agents noticed more bookings than last year. So it's a matter of commencements versus cancellations. We see more participation at student housing events than we see at the other asset class virtual events. We see higher occupancies than we expected back in June, July. So the overall situation, I don't want to do any rosy picture or rosier than it is, but we are also quite surprised with a relatively okay situation in student housing. But the fact is that be it investors or operators or developers seem to be relatively in a better position than many other asset classes, which you can also see with the strong support of a financial sector. So not only financial support is confident, and is supportive, but we see more capital coming to student housing, which is probably indicative for the trajectory that the asset class is moving towards. There are some examples of the deals that were concluded this year. Probably other asset classes might not be in a position to conclude as many deals percentage-wise as student housing, even though, as I mentioned, there is quite an increase. And I would conclude with a pipeline. So basically, in 2021, we are expecting 185 establishments to be concluded and open, with out of which 105 PBSAs are already under construction, so 35,000 beds out of 59,000. So, which would say that 40% of them have not started yet or are delayed for 2021. When it comes to 2022, we have 95,000 establishments in the pipeline, out of which sort of 10,000 beds, or 25%, have already initiated the construction. So the overall mood and dedication and commitment to completion and to investments is rather positive.